My first thoughts of Friday, January 13, 2023, is that it was a great day for a hike. I say this because I went hiking that day. Not to Baldi. I hiked from Heaton Flat to Allison Saddle. I took this picture. Note the date and time, January 13, 10:50 a.m. Ahead, you see Allison Saddle, my destination. To the left is Iron Mountain. Straight ahead to the east is Mount Baldy. This is the west summit. The actual summit is behind this summit, not visible in the picture. To the right of the summit is the ridge the old Mount Baldy trail follows. There is no storm or fog on Mount Baldy. The sky has high clouds, which decrease the sun's intensity, but visibility is excellent. The summit is covered in snow, as well as the ridge. Many people remember that it was stormy the day that Julian Sands went missing. This is not the case. They are thinking of Saturday, the day after Sands went missing, when the mountain was covered in fog and a winter storm hit around noon. The storms forced authorities to stop the search for Sands. Friday, the day before, the weather was good. It was a great day for a hike. We are going to come back to this picture. Julian Sands woke up early the morning of Friday, January 13, 2023, and prepared to go on a hike. This was not unusual for him. He loved to hike and was an accomplished mountaineer. In the 1990s, he had climbed to an altitude over 20,000 feet in the Andes, and in 2016, he scaled Weisshorn Peak in the Swiss Alps. On that January morning, 2023, he planned to hike up Mount Baldy, a mountain familiar to him. He left his West Hollywood home at approximately 5:30 a.m. and drove less than an hour and a half to the trailhead at Makapa Flat. On his hike, he wore winter clothing, a backpack, and hiking boots. He attached microspikes to his boots for added traction in snow and ice and used 2 trekking poles to help maintain his balance. He likely started his hike a little after 7 a.m. At this point, I will pause the story to acquaint you with Mount Baldy and with 3 popular routes to its summit that are relevant to this program, and 1 less popular route. The general picture. This is Mount Baldy. Its official name is Mount San Antonio. This is the summit, and on the southeast face of the mountain is Baldy Bowl, a large depression on the side of the mountain. The first route to the summit that I will describe is my favorite. It is the Devil's Backbone Trail. This starts easy enough. From the trailhead at Makapa Flat, it follows the dirt access road to Baldy Notch, where the resort is. To travel from the notch to the start of the Devil's Backbone Trail, you can hike up any one of the ski runs on the left. The Devil's Backbone starts off with a narrow ridge with steep drop-offs on both sides. As you travel up, you are treated to spectacular views of Baldy Bowl and more drop-offs. Trail length is 6.7 miles one way, with about 4,300 feet of elevation gain. The second route is Baldy Bowl Trail. It branches off the access road less than a mile from the trailhead. It climbs up to the ski hut, then crosses the bottom of Baldy Bowl. From there, it ascends up the side of the bowl and follows the ridge to the summit. The trail is 3.9 miles one way, with about 3,900 feet of elevation gain. These are the 2 most popular trails, and frequently they are done as a loop, one direction or the other. The third route is Old Mount Baldy Trail. It starts near the Visitor Center in Baldy Village and passes through Bear Canyon, then ascends to the ridge, which it follows most of the way to the top. The trail length is 6.5 miles one way, with a generous 5,800 feet of elevation gain. The Devil's Backbone Trail in the winter can become laden with snow, and to the untrained and insufficiently equipped, it becomes a death trap. The better trail to take in winter conditions is the Baldy Bowl Trail. Frequently it is hiked using trekking poles and microspikes, but when the snow is deeper and conditions icier, It requires crampons and an ice axe. The less traveled route is the northern approach. It starts in Wrightwood and follows the North Backbone Trail. It is the most challenging route, with 6,800 feet of elevation gain, 6.5 miles one way. Going back to the Julian Sands story, we don't exactly know what happened to Sands after he started his hike. We know that he was on the Baldy Bowl Ridge thanks to a ping from his iPhone. He was due back in the afternoon. When he didn't return, his wife reported him missing that evening. The next morning, search and rescue teams combed the mountain, but the search had to be cut short to avoid an incoming storm. Thereafter, authorities conducted air and drone searches and ground searches, weather permitting. His worried family wanted to know what became of him, and several days after he went missing, his 37-year-old son Henry, accompanied by an experienced mountaineer, conducted his own private search of the mountain without success. San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department conducted 8 searches for him. On the June 17th search, over 80 search and rescue personnel, supported by 2 helicopters and drones, searched remote areas across Mount Baldy. During the 2022-2023 winter, atmospheric rivers dumped record amounts of snow upon Mount Baldy, bearing all traces of Julian Sands. It was not until the spring melt in the early summer, specifically on June 24th, over 5 months after he went missing, a group of hikers hiking off-trail found his remains in Good Canyon. Where is Good Canyon? Good Canyon is a canyon between the 2 ridges. The ridge of the old Baldy Trail is to its west. To its east is the ridge of Baldy Bowl Trail. The obvious way by which he got there is that he fell from the Baldy Bowl Trail ridge into the canyon. Using Google Maps to estimate the likely place of fall origin and fall distances. We want to estimate the horizontal distance of the fall and vertical distance. To do this, the first thing we do is enter the GPS coordinates of Julian Sands' remains. I obtained these coordinates from the coroner's investigation report, and it's marked here. Next, what I'm going to do is mark the trail. We know that he was on the Baldy Bowl Trail from his cell phone ping, and I'm going to use the measure distance function in Google to give us approximate area. So that gives us where the trail is. Then I go to the terrain function, and there we go. Now we can see our contour lines. Here's the 9,400 foot level. This is the elevation of this line. The thick lines are 200 feet apart, so this is 9,200 foot level. And that tells us the elevations at the different levels. A few things about contour lines. First of all, if you see the line going inward, like you do here, it means there's a canyon or valley. This is Good Canyon coming down. When you see the lines going outward, it's an outcropping or a ridge. We see that there's a ridge here going up. We also see that there's a ridge here. This is an outcropping. There's a ridge going up this way, and this is the ridge the trail follows. This ridge is important. If something falls, it will tend to fall at a right angle to the contour lines. So it may fall down like this, and as it gets down here, it will fall down like this. If Julian Sands had fallen on this side of the ridge, to the right of the ridge, he would have fallen this way. Or he could have fallen this way. He couldn't have ended up over here. To end up over here, he would have had to have been on the left side of the ridge. So he had to have been at least this high up to be able to get here, or higher. So he could have been up here. From here, upward. Okay, so this spot right here, we'll just mark that. I'm going to clear this measurement, and I'm going to leave a distance measurement from there to his remains. And that's about 1,500 feet horizontal. So that would be almost a minimum there. It may be higher than that, but it's unlikely to be lower than that. So about 1,500 feet horizontally. The vertical distance of the fall, we know this is 8,400 feet. Between, this is 92, this is 9,400 feet. Halfway between is 9,300 feet. 9,300 minus 8,400 is 900 feet. So it's about a 900-foot vertical drop between here, and it could have been higher. One other important fact, let's go back to the satellite view. If you look at the fall line, you see trees, lots of trees. So it's very likely he hit a tree on his way down. 3 things that could have initiated the fall. First, his fall could have been initiated by a medical event. The most common cause for this is sudden cardiac death from a heart attack. You can detect a heart attack by its presence on autopsy. Second, his fall could have been initiated by a non-medical event, most commonly a slip. The third possibility is that he was caught in an avalanche. The coroner's investigation and autopsy reports. From the coroner's investigation report, his remains consisted of bones scattered within a 100-foot radius. Most of his larger bones were recovered. No significant soft tissue was present. What this means is that at some point during his body's many months stay in the wilderness, wild animals found it and scavenged all the soft tissues and pulled apart the skeleton, distributing the bones over a wide area. The autopsy report indicated that animal tooth marks were present on many of the recovered bones. Without a heart to examine, we will never know with certainty if he had a heart attack or another medical problem initiating the fall. However, by studying the bones, we might be able to establish a cause of death if we see significant antemortem fractures. Then we could say he died of blunt force trauma. As opposed to a medical cause of death, he could have died from trauma. So did the bones reveal any antemortem fractures? His skull was missing most of its right zygomatic arch, and the nearby right maxillary bone had a fracture. This makes me think he may have hit his face on a tree or rock on his slide down. In a long, uncontrolled slide with so many trees around, this is what I would expect would happen. Unfortunately, an animal tooth mark was present at the fracture site, suggesting that a post-mortem animal bite could have caused the fracture. Thus, the coroner could not establish whether the fracture was antemortem or post-mortem. Another important point is that they only recovered the first 2 cervical vertebrae. The other 5 were missing. This is significant because neck fractures are not uncommon during falls, and they can kill by injuring the spinal cord. He could have sustained neck fractures. These fragmented bones are less likely to be found and recovered. However, without definitive evidence, this is speculation, and we cannot say that he had antemortem neck fractures. They also did not recover all his thoracic vertebrae and ribs. Rib fractures are common in falls, and these fractures can pierce the lungs, causing the lungs to collapse. We do not know if he had antemortem rib fractures because the animals destroyed the potential evidence. In the end, the coroner could not establish a medical cause of death, and he did not have definitive evidence of antemortem fractures to establish trauma as the cause of death either. Therefore, he appropriately listed the cause of death as undetermined. I found a post on Reddit made by a mountaineer who hiked up and down the Baldy Trail the morning after Julian Sands went missing. Since he hiked before the storm hit on the 14th, the snow levels on the trail would have been the same as they were the day before. He wrote that conditions on the trail required crampons, a helmet, and an ice axe, and that is how he was equipped. Sometimes you can take a winter hike up Baldy Trail using microspikes and trekking poles, but not in 2023. With atmospheric rivers delivering more than the usual amounts of snow, he needed crampons, a helmet, and an ice axe. He was an experienced mountaineer, and I suspect at some point he wished he had his equipment. In my opinion, the most likely scenario is that he slipped and slid down the mountain. Unable to arrest his fall, he traveled a long way down. If you take that long of an uncontrolled slide down an icy slope, the usual cause of death is blunt force trauma. His being caught in an avalanche is possible, but is less likely. I say this because the mountaineer went up the same path the next day without incident, and the avalanche risk did not get high until more snow fell in the weeks to come. As for the likelihood of a heart attack precipitating the fall, his wife told the coroner that Julian did not have any medical problems. The only heart attack risk factor I identified is that he is a male over 45 years old. You may wonder if mountain hiking increases heart attack risk. A couple of studies examined mountain hiking and the risk of sudden cardiac death. Sudden cardiac death is usually caused by a heart attack accompanied by an arrhythmia. A study found that in men over 34 years old who were unaccustomed to mountain hiking, who went mountain hiking, significantly increased their risk of sudden cardiac death over baseline risk. By contrast, men who regularly engaged in mountain hiking experienced a decrease in sudden cardiac death compared to baseline risk. Regular, in this study, meant mountain hiking at least 14 days per year. From media reports, it appears that Sands regularly engaged in mountain hiking, which would mean that his risk of dying of sudden cardiac death during a hike is lower. Thus, I do not think that sudden cardiac death is the likely cause of death in this instance. Back to this picture. The location of Julian Sands' body was just on the other side of this ridge, about here in Good Canyon. Julian Sands started his hike around 7 a.m. By the time I took this picture, he had recently fallen, or he is on the trail and is about to fall. Knowing this, seeing this picture now makes me uncomfortable. Case 2. Sreenivas Mokkapati. This next case goes back to 2019. It is the case of Sreenivas Mokkapati. That name is from the Indian subcontinent, making him an Indian American. He went by the name Sri. He was 52 years old and an experienced hiker. On Sunday, December 8, 2019, Sri joined 3 friends for a day hike up Mount Baldi via the old Mount Baldi trail. They went through snow and fog up the mountain. At one point, his friends turned around on the trail because of the bad weather. Sri decided to continue on alone. This is the last picture of Sri alive, taken by one of his friends. He is alone, ascending the trail in a shroud of fog, surrounded by patches of snow. This picture appears to be taken somewhere along the ridge. I have hiked this trail. There is nothing on the trail below the ridge that looks like this. Later that day, when Sri did not return, his friends notified authorities. Helicopter and ground team searches were conducted, weather permitting. On December 14th, 6 days into the search, 126 searchers in 23 teams combed the mountain looking for Sri. During the search, a 9-year veteran of West Valley Search and Rescue Team, Timothy Staples, became separated from his search partner. A search for Tim found him dead, a victim of a fall down an ice chute. After Tim's death, authorities suspended the ground search operation for Sri. A little over 6 months after Sri disappeared, on June 19, 2020, 2 hikers found his remains on the northwest slope of Mount Baldi, near the top of Fish Fork. Using Google Maps to estimate the likely place of fall origin and fall distances, I entered the GPS coordinates of Sri's remains. I took these coordinates from the coroner's investigation report. Let's orient ourselves. This is the summit of Mount Baldi. We know that Sri came up the old Mount Baldi trail. For Sri's remains to end up where they did, Sri had to have gone down the North Backbone Trail. Let's take a look at the North Backbone Trail. To do this, we're going to have to change to terrain mode. The trail follows the ridge, and I marked it in red. Let's look more closely at the trail. If Sri fell from the trail at this point, he would slide down over here and not end up where his remains were found. If he should fall anywhere south of this ridge, his body would have ended up in a different location. So he had to have fallen north of this ridge. Likewise, he had to have fallen south of this ridge, because falling anywhere north would put his body in a different location. Let's look more closely at this section of the trail. The first part of this trail goes down, then it goes up. We know that people are more likely to fall when going downhill, so he was more likely to fall on the downhill section on the first part of the trail, and less likely to fall on the uphill section. Moreover, people are more likely to fall on steeper sections, and the downhill section is steeper than the uphill section. Again, this makes this downhill section the more likely section where he fell. Using the more likely section to calculate fall distances, the horizontal distance of the fall is somewhere between a little over 2,700 feet to a little over 3,200 feet. As for the vertical distance, it's between about 1,100 feet and 2,000 feet. Any way you look at this, it was a long fall. The coroner's investigation and autopsy reports. Sri's remains were found within his winter clothing. Insects had consumed his soft tissues, leaving skeletonized remains. Areas of mummified skin were found on the head, torso, and extremities. For your information, extreme cold can cause mummification. The left radius bone showed evidence of animal activity. The right radius and most of the bones of both hands were missing, likely from animal activity. Based upon my reading of the report, the animal activity was confined to the hands and to the left and right radius bones. The skull showed extensive fracturing of the facial bones, including the frontal bone and jaw, and extensive fracturing of the base of the skull, including the sphenoid and temporal bones. This man sustained catastrophic head trauma. He had a fracture of his 7th cervical vertebra, rib fractures over his right 3rd to 6th ribs, fractures of both humerus bones, and his right femur bone. There were no internal organs to examine. Again, they were consumed by insects. The coroner's autopsy report lists Sri's cause of death as multiple blunt injuries. From the autopsy findings, it appears that Sri slid down the mountain head first and slammed into a tree or rock, then continued to further slide down the mountain before coming to a stop. Looking back at Google Maps satellite view, we see this possible area where he fell. On a snowy winter, this area is covered with snow. On warmer days, the snow will partially melt, then refreeze during the night, forming a sheet of ice on its surface, creating an ice chute. Falling onto this area anywhere along this section of the ridge would have sent Sri sliding down the ice chute at a rapid speed. Down here we see rocks and trees. This is possibly the area where he hit the rock or tree. With the head trauma, he would go unconscious and never wake up. With his catastrophic head injury and internal bleeding from his fractured extremities, he died quickly. I could not determine if he was using trekking poles or a footwear traction device. The coroner's investigation report did not mention finding them, but the report does not always include everything that was recovered. Discussion. I put these two cases into the same program to highlight their similarities and a major difference. The common features between them are that both hikers went missing in the snow, and their remains were not found until many months later, after the spring melt. By that time, their remains were skeletonized. The major difference between them was the process by which each of them was skeletonized. In the wilderness, a dead body is food for insects, and food for scavenging vertebrates. Scavenging vertebrates are more destructive than insects. In Julian Sands' case, the coroner could not establish the cause of death because scavenging vertebrates consumed his soft tissues, destroying any potential evidence of a medical cause of death, and they disarticulated his skeleton, scattering and damaging the bones, thus destroying any potential evidence of trauma as a cause of death. With Sri, insects consumed his soft tissues without disarticulating the skeleton or significantly damaging the relevant bones. With the antemortem fractures preserved, the coroner established multiple blunt injuries as Sri's cause of death. This is the first program in a series of programs that reviews cases of fatal and non-fatal falls which occurred during winter hiking in the Mount Baldy area. In total, I plan to review 6 fatal cases and 2 non-fatal cases. After my case presentations are complete, in the final program in this series, I will analyze the cases, add additional information, and use this information to make recommendations on how to reduce the risk of serious injuries and deaths from falls. Thank you for listening. If you like the program, reward me by pressing the like button. I invite you to watch the next program in this series. If you don't want to miss it, be sure to subscribe.